The thing that ruins a person's mind is when they use words that actually create a sense of reality that's really destructive. And in my view, need, should, ought, and must are for, and I feel like I need to wash my mouth out. I'll use coffee today, but uh, need, should, ought, and must are four of those words, and gotta, have to, supposed to, all the slang that goes along with it. But the four words, need, should, ought, and must, create a sense of obligation or a standard to which someone is held that now becomes a requirement. What happens if you do not do what you need, should, ought, or must do? The response is, I'm guilty, I'm ashamed, I failed, I didn't live up to my potential, blah, 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 all that kind of stuff. The challenge, however, was the standard that was set actually authentic? Who has the right to set that standard and hold me accountable to it? And what are the real consequences?
Are you curious about discovering ways of making your life better? Then welcome to my podcast. I'm Bob Nickman, and this is The Exploding Human. Listen in while I talk with all kinds of people in the fields of personal growth, health and healing, alternative therapies, psychology, spirituality, environment, and the future. I'm looking for those answers that make life better for everyone. You'll meet cutting-edge practitioners, doctors, artists, filmmakers, business people, and those who have overcome challenges. The brave, the curious, anyone who is out there helping us humans to explore, expand, and explode. Hey, I'm Bob Nickman, and welcome to The Exploding Human. My guest today is Dr. Myke Merrill and Michael Wilson. Two guests, a team of wonderfulness. And we're going to be talking about reality, gripping reality, and their book, Why Do People Act That Way, and What Can I Do About It? Really great guys, and we had a blast doing this one. But before we get to Myke and Mike, I want to invite you to visit my website, theexplodinghuman.com. And on that website are photos of all my guests, the interviews, synopses of the episodes, a little bio on myself, and a donate button, which will take you to Patreon. And on Patreon, I have some extra content. If you would like to be a supporter of the show at any level, much appreciation. Right now, I've got some interviews that I did with my friend Mark. He interviewed me, and so you get to find out a little bit about how I got started doing The Exploding Human and what my childhood and beyond was like. That kind of brought me to this point where I'm doing a show about body, mind, and spirit. So, and you can also go to patreon.com/theexplodinghuman, and would so appreciate any support for the show, the people that have supported it. Thank you so much. Also, I have a YouTube channel, The Exploding Human with Bob Nickman. Add the with Bob Nickman. And there's a Facebook page. Now, my guest today, Myke and Mike, MYKE, is Dr. Myke Merrill and Myke Wilson. These guys have been working together for, they've been friends for 35 years, something like that. And let me just say that we recorded this the day after the riots in the Capitol. So there's some of the information is kind of informed by what happened there and vice versa. So just keep in mind when we're talking about that, that's when this was recorded on January 7th. It says here in my notes about these guys, which is accurate from my experience interviewing them, get a grip of your sense of reality and your place in it. Dr. Myke Merrill and Michael E. Wilson are a dynamic duo. That is true. They're dynamic, and there's two of them, so that would make them a dynamic duo. And they speak about the importance of being mindful of one's emotions and perceptions. When one understands their perceptions, emotions, motivations, and behaviors, they will be able to understand their true reality. It's a great message. I love these guys, and they do lots of work all across the country, seminars and trainings with corporations and schools. They're really great guys. We had lots of laughs and lots of great information, very helpful to anyone that wants to get a grip on reality. And we'll even get into what reality is in terms of perception. very helpful to anyone that wants to improve their life. And after all, that is what this podcast is about. So without further delay, here is Myke Merrill and Myke Wilson. I watched a little bit of your podcast, and you were talking about getting a grip on reality, but
yes.
And I guess we should talk about what reality is, because it's sort of fluid is one of the words you were using, and and I guess you've written a book, and so let's just give me a little background on what you guys are doing, because it's pretty interesting to me. That's why you're here.
Cool.
Mostly what we try to do is cause trouble.
I'm all for that. I'm in 100%.
And part of the trouble is actually shows that something's alive, and it's subject to change, and there's ways of making change happen that are sometimes comfortable and sometimes they're uncomfortable. The book we wrote is called "Why Do People Act That Way, and What Can I Do About It?" And both of those questions are extremely important. Why do people do what they do? Why do I do what I do? Why do other people around me? Why do people I don't even know? Why is what's happening in Washington happening? And I mean, what's going on here? Why do people act that way? But the parenthetical question, which is actually what we want to get to, is what do I do about it? What can I do about it? What will I do about it? And so the challenge then becomes those two questions. What's real? How do I perceive it? And then what does it mean to me?
We're kind of a little different on kind of this stuff, because Myke and I professionally have been, even though we live clear across the other side of the, coast to coast. He's in New York, I'm in Washington State, and but we have addressed many of the same issues using the same kind of methodology, and because we have been friends for probably 35 some years. What we're about is trying to help people. I mean, it's kind of, we do this because we enjoy it. We do this because it's fun.
We do it because we earn a huge amount of money doing this. I mean, come
absolutely.
on. Like
I can tell by the decorations on the walls that you guys are just rolling in it.
We are. He has to get up and close his own door because he doesn't have an entire staff waiting on him hand and foot. Right. Garcon, yes.
The guy stepped out.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah, these arenas of helping people are always super lucrative, aren't they?
Yeah.
Anyway, so Myke was on a roll there explaining why we do this.
Yeah, anyway, it doesn't really
It's
matter.
altruistic. We like helping people.
Yeah, whatever. It's like, yeah. No, I mean, and we just, we work from the perspective that, look, if I can give you something that's going to make your life better in, 30 seconds or 90 seconds or whatever, why would I not do that? I mean, why wouldn't I help you? When you see something, it's like, okay. So that's kind of,
that's a great rhetorical question, but it deserves an answer, because we can. Sometimes people do things just because they can, and we help people just because we can. I mean, that's really when it comes right down to it.
Yeah.
Well, ultimately, service to other people is kind of the highest calling, because it involves compassion and actually caring about other people. So
true.
Thank you for that.
Well, you're welcome, but it's really our joy. I mean, we probably have way too much fun at this, is the bottom line.
Well, see, that I was going to say that when you just said the word joy, if there's joy in things that we're doing, then that seems to make it more valid to me, because if people are laughing and they're feeling good, that tells me there's a connection from the source that's important. That's how I feel. If I'm laughing, I know that something's really honest.
Good point.
Yeah, and joy is the kind of the goal of living, elusive as it may be at times.
Right.
That's the thing that I want as much as possible, even though I don't act that way all the time to get there.
And I think that's a lot of the difficulty that we're seeing right now, is as a country, a nation, in so many ways, people are so consumed with themselves. They are not able, they're not capable, or they don't know how to even get outside of themselves. And they wonder why they're so miserable. As well, first off, get a perspective. And if you start looking around and realize what you have or don't have in that respect, or don't have to deal with that somebody else has to deal with, it's all of a sudden you get other oriented. Life changes really fast for you, and either you're going to become a person that just disengages from that whole thing, or you're going to start realizing that, well, maybe I need to have a little different perspective about life, and maybe my life's not that bad. Maybe I have it pretty dang good, and I hate to use the word grateful, but maybe we ought to be a little more grateful for what we have versus what we keep wanting or thinking we should have. That can make your life that much more robust. And I can safely say, and I believe Mike would say the same thing, over our entire lifetime and careers, professionally and just personally, there's never been a time, even in difficult personal, interpersonal relationships, that I would look back and say, I wish that never had happened. I wish I never understood that story. I wish I never met that person, because there's always something in that story and in that relationship that can help you gain a different perspective. And that's really where all this came out of.
There was something you said, and it was also in the podcast of yours that I listened to, which was the word should. And I loved that the way you guys were talking about that. And I remember once being in a meeting with some people, and I was talking about should, I should have this, or this should be this way, and the guy hands me a piece of paper with the word should on it, with a circle around it and a diagonal through it.
Right.
And I went, what is he doing? What is he saying? It was a great moment. I mean, he did me the biggest favor. I'm like, yeah, who am I to decide what should or shouldn't be anything?
Well, we have certain words that we consider curse words, and we do.
Let's talk about that. Yeah.
Do our best not to use curse words. So a lot of times my mother used to wash my mouth out with soap when I said some kind of a nasty biological word.
Yeah.
And the problem is nasty biological words are just simply nasty biology. It's no big deal. The thing that ruins a person's mind is when they use words that actually create a sense of reality that's really destructive. And in my view, need, should, ought, and must are four. And I feel like I need to wash my mouth out. I'll use coffee today. But need, should, ought, and must are four of those words, and gotta, have to, supposed to, all the slang that goes along with it. Mm-hmm. But the four words, need, should, ought, and must, create a sense of obligation or a standard to which someone is held that now becomes a requirement. What happens if you do not do what you need, should, ought, or must do? The response is, I'm guilty, I'm ashamed, I failed, I didn't live up to my potential, blah, 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 all that kind of stuff. The challenge, however, was the standard that was set actually authentic? Who has the right to set that standard and hold me accountable to it? And what are the real consequences? So I happened to be in a meeting where this kind of congealed in my frontal cortex with an executive in the denomination in which I was working. I was an executive in that same denomination for youth. He was a denominational executive for another division. And we were in 1987 or 8 or somewhere around there. And he made the comment, or we were asked to put into writing our agenda for the next year, our vision, our plan for our departments. And he went first. And I tend to say things that I think sometimes quickly, and then other people have to pick up the broken glass. So he's going through this he's going through this document, which he had prepared and made copies of for all the executives that were in this meeting. And he had 10 points. Our department we need to blank. We need to number 2, number 3, we need to number 4, we need to 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. We need to all the way down. And he finished up, put his hands crossed on the tabletop and said, that's my vision for 20 or 19, whatever the year was. And so one of the executive leaders said, so what kind of feedback do you want to give? And I said, what happens if we don't do what we need to do? And the room was just like, what? I said, what happens if we don't do what we need to do? And he said, well, we'll just put them on next year's list. And I said, so we don't really need to do them. And the room is dead silent because everybody had always done, oh, that is really good. That is really what, let's thank so-and-so for their hard work that they did. And so I actually started having all these thoughts clot like blood. You're actually saying we don't need to do these things. We should do them. Do we have to do them? Is this something we ought to do? And the room is getting more and more tense. I'm thinking, I'm just not going to use the words need, should, ought, or must anymore. Anyway, do you want to hear our philosophy of reality?
Yeah, I do. Who wouldn't want to hear that?
I could start naming names, but I'm not going to. There are people who do not want to hear our version of reality.
Well, okay.
And that's probably wisdom at its best.
And then you can tell me how to change everybody's mind to my way of thinking. That'll be the next thing.
There you go. That's it.
Just you give up and then you're good. I think one of the things that I've struggled with as a philosopher and as an actual human being living on this planet, both, is to define what is real. And when I make a comment, there are young people I know, and the first word out of their mouth is really or seriously. The concept of every aspect being found in reality is philosophically in our minds that we actually understand what's real. Our senses of perception pick up reality. What they actually do is they interpret every aspect that comes into our senses according to our beliefs, our experience, the way in which we have developed an understanding of the things that are occurring around us. For example, are you really sitting by the ocean in the Caribbean with a palm tree? Now, that's kind of fakey looking on my screen.
Mm-hmm.
So I would say, no, that's not real because it's digital, but it's digitally real. My eyes are picking up energy coming off my computer screen, and I interpret the shape of your face, your glasses, your shirt, the screen background. I interpret that as a man, a human being, around 85 years old.
I'm 93.
It's not the years, it's the mileage. Come on, you gotta be nice.
So I'll have an interpretation of that. In the book, we start out with a chapter of what is reality. What does it mean to see and feel something real? So I tell the story of a woman who wakes up in the middle of the night and she leaves all the lights off because she doesn't want to wake up her family. And she walks into her living room, and in the middle of the walkway between the furniture, she smashes her shin into something extremely hard and sharp. And it cuts her shin. It is incredibly painful. She sits down and she starts muttering under her breath, curses at her 14-year-old son for moving the coffee table or leaving some of his sports junk in the middle of the room. And she is furious. She's about ready to go into his room, throttle him in the middle of the night, 3:30 in the morning, screaming, ranting, raving like a maniac. She turns on the light next to the couch to look at her knee, or her shin, which is bleeding, and sees a military footlocker. And immediately she knows her son, who's 19, who went to boot camp, got home early in the middle of the night and left his footlocker right in the middle. And her anger turns to joy. And she starts shrieking that he's home from boot camp, and everybody in the family wakes up, and she is thrilled beyond belief. The question is, what is real?
Mm-hmm.
When she first smacked into that thing, her perceptions, her memory, her assumptions, her background, the pain, all those things contributed to give her the awareness that the obstacle in her pathway should not have been there, did not belong there, and someone is in terrible trouble for having left something there. And instantly, with a just slight difference of understanding, it turns to joy and celebration and resounding gratitude that her son is home. What reality changed? Her perceptions of reality changed. Therefore, when you get hurt by a friend, you lose a job, you lost $20, you found $20. It doesn't matter what event occurs. You have to interpret that. You have to develop a sense of its meaning in your life. So Myke and I, as we've struggled to try and to put into language that we could use and that other people can use effectively, we ask two vital questions. We come back to these two questions over and over and over. What does this mean to me? And what can I do with it?
Mm.
As opposed to, why did that person do this? What's wrong with the world? How come I can never get ahead? On and on and on. You take the event as you experience it, the incident, the experience, and you ask the question, what does this mean to me? What's it doing to me?
Right.
And then, what can I do with this? What will I do with this? What do I do with this? And if you can answer those two questions, you can actually change the way you experience reality, in my opinion. Take it from there, Myke.
Well, I just think that it doesn't even really matter what situation. We've described this, obviously it's in the book and we described this, but I was just thinking in the context of, let's take something highly emotional, serious. And this, in my first professional career, I spent quite a bit of time in thantology, which about helping grieving people and how do you deal with grief and those kinds of things. And one of the things that they found here in the state of Washington, and the Washington State Patrol found, is that forever and ever and ever, they would not allow particularly parents to see pictures of suicides.
Mm.
So what happened, and I know this sounds really gruesome, but this is it's the same kind of point. So what they would say and what parents would hear, or friends would hear, or close relatives would hear things like, I know this is kind of rough, but they would say things like, well, he blew his head off, all right? So they decided they were going to try something and see if that, because parents particularly and mothers particularly were having such a difficult time getting closure. Other words, and we would say really coming to grips with reality, because what they were seeing in their mind's eye was not what was real. And so they actually they started to do a research and test, and they began to let people see an array of photos of what had gone on. And the guy that was training us said, he says, I'll never forget the first time I did this with mom. It was a bad suicide, and the young man had killed himself. He had shot himself in the head. And all she knew was this fact that somebody had said, well, he literally blew his head off. And he says, I remember so distinctly when I showed her the pictures, and her response to me was, he always had the brownest eyes.
Whoa.
Which then said to them, as they were doing, and they said that happened over and over and over and over and over and over again, where the loved one would pick up something, they wouldn't even see the wound, they wouldn't see the destruction, they would pick up something that was real to them in that moment that could help them cross that threshold. I mean, that is powerful stuff.
Sure. Wow. I would not predict any of that response.
Yeah. And so now that's what takes place. Why? Because if you are left with, for example, the same thing in Mike's illustration, with a mom who cracks her shin, and what is she thinking? She's thinking it's her 14-year-old, he's being a jerk, and yada, 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 yada. Light comes on. What do? I see it. My perceptions change. My emotions change. What have I just done? I have seen reality. It's the very same thing, and from an extremely traumatic kind of situation. But both of those are about, what is it doing to me? So what was it doing to me? It was allowing me to have all of these perceptions and feelings that were not real. And once the light came on and I was able to see it, what is it doing to me? It gives me the ability to, what do I do with it now? What am I going to do with this? Well, now I can figure out, okay, wow, my response is this, because I'm seeing the actual thing that brings me to a point of reality. So in the book, and on the front of the book, you'll see we have 4 different pieces of this, the PEMB, which we call perceptions, emotions, motivations, and behaviors. And there are 4 heads that interact with each other. And in the middle, it's like a Venn diagram. In the middle, we have this little kind of cinnamon diamond thing with a question mark. And when we train and teach and talk in podcasts and all those kinds of things, we always are talking about that cinnamon diamond in the middle, because to us, that's the question. What's it doing to you, and what can you do about it? Because that's where reality lies, right in that intersection, because all of these pieces are interacting at that point. So it's a little different way of looking at life from that perspective.
Yeah, and it requires a certain amount of pausing when an event happens and not reacting immediately. I think,
that's a very good word to choose right there, Bob, when you say not reacting, because the emotional, we define emotion as the link between our perceptions and our motivations. It's how we process, what do we experience by our perceptions, and how do we get ourselves ready to act or suspend our action on those perceptions. So the question then is, are our emotions a reaction or are they a response? And the way I coach people is, a response is when you have planned out who will you be and how will you choose to process what you're experiencing.
Right.
A reaction is unplanned. It's literally when the doctor has your knee up on and he uses that little hammer and you get a reaction of the muscle. You can't control that. That is an out of control reaction. So what we do is teach the difference between response and reaction. And sometimes you do react. There's no alternative to an unplanned, instantaneous reaction. But most of the time, you can prepare and you can respond instead of reacting. That's a different strategy.
Right.
Yeah, it's I remember reading that reactivity equals unconsciousness, and unconsciousness equals reactivity. In that, if we are not, I guess the word that you would use would be mindful of what's going on and taking a look at it in a way that isn't reactive, then we're going to react. And the classic is, look what you made me do, but what you did.
Now, you made me is one of those swear words that we also don't use, which is my response is your fault.
Yeah.
Now, if I can convince both of us in this equation that that's true, then I'm off the hook for how I respond, and you are now on the hook for my reaction. So within families, within marriages, at work, that happens frequently. You made me so mad. You make me so happy. You fill in the blank. Well, the problem is if you make me happy and I'm not happy, who has to do something for me to be happy? You do. And I can now control you.
We are wonderful creatures sometimes, aren't we?
Well, it's part of training. In our culture, the shift of blame and responsibility is a common technique that people use as a defense mechanism. That, in my view, and when that happens and families are breaking down or partners in a business are really dissolving their alliance, or a community is at odds, when Myke and I get called in to do college level training or business consultations or family therapy or working with an entire church or an organization that's falling apart, we listen carefully to the way in which the various participants put into words. We goad them and prompt them and stimulate and throw concepts out, get them to react, to listen. How do they phrase their understanding of reality and their part in it? And if we hear a lot of language of you made me, or this makes me, or
they did it, or
So once we hear that, we start helping them at least address, and if not unravel, the tangle of who they are in reality compared to other people, and start to take ownership. Our podcast, by the way, thanks for asking, is called Gripping Reality. And the concept we have for that is if a person cannot grip their own reality, they can do nothing to change it. They have no authority in their own life. And that's what's going to lead to the destruction that they utterly hate. So we teach them how to grip their reality.
Which can be, I'm sure at times, unpleasant to have to look at learned behaviors and belief systems that aren't working, but that are so entrenched from so long ago. That I think, I mean, I remember, working on what do I believe? This was many years ago. I actually wrote down my beliefs about what do I think about women? What do I think about money? What do I think about, my parents? What are my beliefs about these things? And some of them were so not the way I think now. They were just so skewed. And, in a work environment, I guess that you're dealing with, or any kind of social situation, when you force people to look at that stuff, some people are going to rebel and they're not going to want to do it. And sometimes they will, and they'll grow out of it.
Or they're going to push back at the beginning because it's an uncomfortable skill. It's really like anything. If I do deep knee bends to get my heart and my body into good health, the first 10 of them, I am going to be taking ibuprofen for the next 2 weeks because I'm going to ache and hurt all over. Once I've done 50 of those a day for 3 months, 10 is not a big deal. But at the beginning, the stress of moving from top dead center into some kind of forward motion, that is where the strain is. So we give people permission to back off, take it easy. Don't start off with 10 deep knee bends. Try to do one. Try to do a half of one, and let's work from there. So if they need permission to slow down the process, I'm real good with that. As long as they say, my life is tangled, it's full of knots, I'm actually quite comfortable with all the knots, even though I hate the outcomes. Can you help me? And we'll say, sure. And the moment you say, stop untangling my knots, we will respect that. But if you want us to keep going, bear in mind, there can be some challenge, some pain, some distress as you're learning to do this. Everyone we work with, including ourselves, experiences that pain.
There are victims in the world, but there are very, very few of them. And most in our culture, we have developed a victim mindset, which then allows me to, as Mike said, project it on something else. But I really don't own my piece of this thing. And we probably will never be a terribly, people won't like us a whole lot because we are very upfront with saying, look, if you don't want to own it, you want to be accountable, are willing to say, I own this piece, this is me, and I want to make this kind of a change. You didn't get to where you are because you kept blaming everybody in the world. You came to a point that says, look, this is my life and I don't like it. I'm going to own this and I need to do something about this. That's exactly what we teach. And that's the very first step. We could teach you all of these different pieces, and that's really nice and wonderful. But if you're not willing to own it and to own who you are and where you are in whatever place, and we're not going to be mean and, like you said, shove everything down you. We're going to work easily and gently with you and move you through. And if you want to take time, we're willing to do that. The key is, do you really own it? Because if you don't own it, then we're wasting each other's time. We're not going to get anywhere, because it won't become a reality because you're not being accountable and owning your life. And that's the only way it's going to change.
In any kind of addiction recovery, the idea of hitting the bottom of the barrel is a factor when a person says, I am ready to change. I've hit bottom.
Right.
What we teach is you have the privilege of deciding how far down your bottom is going to be.
Right.
And if you say it's going to be 6 months of living in the gutter, eating pig vomit, fine. That's where you're going to get. But if you decide, I have lost the respect of my wife and my children, I still have my home, I still have my job, I'm still functioning, but for me, that's the bottom. And I am going to change now. That becomes the critical question. Where for you is your change point? And we help people actually discover their change point if they have no language in their minds to actually develop a conversation with themselves about that. But many people will get to the very dregs of their life, ruined and lost everything. My father committed suicide as an alcoholic because he chose not to have any strategies to deal with the changes that had come to him in life. And he got to the last point for himself and said, I'm done. And he killed himself. That wasn't necessary. And it left all of us in incredible pain. I have 9 brothers and sisters, my stepmother, a huge family structure, but he got to the point that he had no capacity to deal with life.
Yeah.
Although he could have.
Yeah, it's that point where somebody says, I don't want to keep going the way I'm going, and I don't know how to stop, and I don't want to stop. And the only way out is that. And right. that's a fairly common, unfortunately, ending to a lot of people's existence with addiction. But, I always wonder, what is that piece in some people that I guess I don't know if you'd want to call it resilience or that spiritual core that says, this is enough. I got to change, and then some people just can't seem to grab that. I don't think there's an answer for that, why or who or what are those factors. But I think what you're doing in your work probably can spur that in some people, and maybe they have not had permission in their life or even the knowledge that those things are possible.
There are adults who literally do not have the language to be able to talk about their emotions or their perceptions or how they function in life. So what we do is we actually teach language to be used to think. And that helps a great, even suicidal people, they have one focus. They've eliminated all other language we bring language back in.
In our society, we have become so, we're so distracted 24/7. We're connected and supposedly connected. And this isn't a rant against, Snapchat or Instagram or Twitter or anything else electronics. But we have truly lost, the part we have lost is the discipline to unconnect. Think about the last time you really disconnected to our current culture and world for an hour, 2 hours, 20 minutes. That dynamic has led us to, I believe, not allow the whole idea of story in people's lives. It's amazing what happens when you spend some elongated time with them. And most people would say, in my world, I work with 20-something guys all the time. People would say to me, those guys don't have time, and they would never talk to you. But it's amazing what happens when you give the time and you start asking questions and then asking better questions, where they're the very people that you would think would never deal or have the capacity to move and start dealing with real issues in their lives at that level. And all of a sudden, because you've had the opportunity to open the windows and to bring them to a place of starting to understand what's going on around them, they're like, wow, I didn't know that for them.
Yeah, it's offering options in a way that may not have been even to people that don't even know there's options.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah, that's right.
Very true.
One of the things that we say to people, in this context, is that we continually ask and get permission. That puts them in the driver's seat. That affirms them. That puts them truly in control of what's going on in the conversation. And I'm not going to drag you to someplace you don't want to go, because it's not going to do you one bit of good if I try and do that. But if you willingly are coming and you're willingly wanting to own what's going on here, guess what? This is going to maximize everything we're doing in a very quick fashion.
So you do workshops? Is that how you work with people? I know you go to companies and you work with youth also.
We do workshops. We do seminars. We get invited into corporate settings, to educational settings, faith settings. We'll do an hour and a half. I did a SPCA, Society for Prevention of Cruelty to Animals. I trained all their staff. They had no customer service training. I'm not an HR person. I'm not a PR person. I'm a trainer of emotions and how they work within our lives. So they had me come in. Somebody read my book and then said, "Hey, let's get this guy to come in." So I had an hour and a half, and we provided for them a base of when clients come in with a damaged animal, how to read that person's emotion. And one of the first things that the staff people said is, people are always crying. I hear the word always.
Yeah.
And I simply said, always? And one of the other staff members said, no, some people are happy. And that blew the meeting apart, because how could you be happy an animal is injured? Well, that created all kinds of discussion. So we looked at the 5 basic emotions, and we had an hour and a half. That was fascinating. Myke and I went to a small college in Kansas, and we had 3 days to work with all the faculty, the staff, and the entire student body. So we did everything from seminars to moving from table to table in the cafeteria to meeting kids just as they were out on a sports activity, and faculty in their offices. We went to every kind of environment we could to help them develop a means of conversation between the faculty, which we called the resident culture, and the student body, which we called migrant culture, and how migrant cultures and resident cultures often have a friction that no one will talk about. So that was a 3-day opportunity for us to train.
It's very valuable work, when you go into these systems that have been in place for a long time, and you can change the perception of people. And you mentioned the word they're always crying. Always and never is another one of those things. That's
yes, ever, never, always. It's what I call the ever, never, always language.
Yeah,
it's a lie. That's
not the one my wife likes. Always. She says, you never clean the sink. Never? I've never cleaned
it. Now we can laugh right now, but there are couples that get divorced over ever, never, always language.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
the framework is, what is reality? Reality is how you begin to describe your perceptions, your emotions, your motivations, and your behaviors. So you'll framework that in your mind. And when you get to ever, never, and always language, literally that person says, that is what's real. You always do this. You never do this. Yeah. Now we're dealing with a perception of reality that is not real.
Well, it's an absolute, and it's a really harsh judgment because it isn't Correct. True. So that one, and the other one is everybody and nobody. Nobody likes me. Who's nobody? You know the entire world? Do you know everyone? These billions of people? No, none of those. Well, it's usually down to 2 or 3, 4 people, maybe.
Challenge for that is when a person has formulated a sense of reality, evidence is not necessarily going to change that, because it's a combination of perceptions, emotions, motivations, and behaviors, not just one or the, it's not just factual, and it's not, well, I'll find somebody in the world that likes you, or to a 13-year-old, everyone doesn't have that technology or can't go to that party. The problem is the perception of reality is locked in. So it's being able to break open that lock that becomes the key.
Well, that's a frightening thing that you just said to me. I don't know if frightening is the right word, but the idea that evidence doesn't change the perception, that is really like a kind of a terrifying idea. Like, you'd think that like, here's the evidence for this false belief or perception that you have. Now you'll be able to change it. Well, I'm not gonna do that. I don't want to believe that evidence. I don't want to see that way.
When we have a formulated sense of reality that we have an investment in being true, a strong investment, evidence to the contrary can be simply dismissed as not being real in and of itself. Mm-hmm. So the challenge in today's world, we don't have the platform yet, Mike and I don't, to be able to address some of the issues of our current culture, but Mike and I understand them, and we have language to actually unravel the complexity that's happening here. Should we be able to gain that platform? What we are counting on, Bob, is that your 30 million followers will listen to what we're saying and hire us in to change their worldview.
I think we should create a position in the government for you guys to.
We should.
What we need to do is have a position in the government.
We must have a position.
We should always have this.
We have done nothing, Mike. We have done nothing.
I know. I'm feeling really, really, really kind of warm and fuzzy right now.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Bob. We interrupted you. I'm so sorry. That's not really. Empathy is one of my strong points. Yeah. Keep going.
Yep. Yeah. Well, and humiliation too.
I'm very proud of how humble I am.
They're both light, but that's okay.
Well, it is. It's a very habitual thing, to say those words. I mean, I'm sure you guys do it too. You catch yourself going, you should.
We do.
I don't, but I catch Mike saying it a lot.
Yeah, that's a lie.
So
that's a bold-faced lie.
No,
it doesn't get to it.
Myke has arrived. The other Myke has arrived. You're still scrambling to achieve his wonderfulness.
I know. Someday. Yeah, I know.
So you replace should with it might be
will.
It might be
will.
I can.
Mm-hmm.
I choose.
It'd be nice if.
It'd be nice, but the word "nice" comes from the Latin
"necere,"
which means.
Don't ruin it for him.
Okay, all right, no, that's fine.
Wait, was I going to be put in my place again? Oh, okay.
No, not at all. The word "nice" comes from the Latin word "necere," which means ignorant, foolish, or childish.
Oh, that's me.
Yeah. So when you do something like spill coffee on your nice white shirt just before you go on to speak, and the other Myke says "nice job," he means it literally.
Oh. You guys are really on both ends of the spectrum at the same time. You're incredibly.
You take a spectrum and put it at both ends. You eventually have a circle.
Yeah, there's a level of cruelty and kindness that is interwoven in your, which is, I'm sure, is very helpful when you're speaking to specifically youth.
My son, now who is 42, when he was 11, was playing on some old rotten wood and got splinters in the bottom of his feet. So he came in crying and wailing, and he must have had 20 splinters in the bottom of one of his feet. So as a loving father, I did the only thing I really could. I pulled every single one of them out before they became infected. Now, one might say that was cruel. I think of it as kind.
Yeah.
Because kindness and cruelty are the same thing.
Did you laugh every time he
screamed? Did I tell you to wear shoes when you played on the wood? I did. Yank.
Look,
yeah. He never did it again.
Yeah.
Never did it again.
Manically laughed every time. Yes. When the culture has been built upon something less than truth, or something that is something that has been manipulated, and you don't understand that it's been manipulated, which again is deceitful. But you have bought into a culture and now have connected yourself that it doesn't matter what anyone says. It's how cults end up where they end up. And so the believability factor goes of being able to change it with any kind of evidence is very difficult to do at that level, because now we've bought into this culture. And that's really what, in my mind, we saw yesterday that was so fascinating, because you also had a whole other group of people who were stunned that this could possibly happen at this level, because they never experienced it before. And Myke and I were talking about it this morning for a little bit before we were doing some other work. And it was like, well, it's really not that difficult to understand, because there has been a culture that has become ingrained and perpetuated that now is such that this really, in the scale of activity and events, it's just the next event. It's the next level of which you go to within that culture. And it's a behavior that until we come to a place as a society again of a country that's willing to move back up the rung in flexibility in order to have some very real dialogue to develop and to have interaction over viewpoints and opinions. That's going to be a really big thing.
The idea of being entrenched and buying into a certain culture, whatever it might be, and giving you an identity and a reason for your life and a purpose, all the things that people want to have, and then if it's challenged, it must feel on a very deep visceral level like death if it's challenged. Because if it becomes someone's identity and their purpose, and then you're saying to them, or it's being challenged in any way, I think a lot of those people feel like they were, fighting for their lives.
Absolutely. And that's how we teach motivation in any kind of human interaction. Motivation is the link between our emotions and our behaviors, how we are motivated to put our perceptions and our emotions into action. That goes through our motivational complex. And we describe 5 varying levels of fluidity. A conversation is very fluid, but an opinion is more fixed. Mm-hmm. So if we say, hey, we're going to order a pizza, you're in Los Angeles, Mike's in Washington, I'm in New York, so we got to get a really big pizza. And we have to have a fast driver who gets to all 3 places so we can each have a piece. What do you want on your pizza? So we're having a conversation, and Mike and I, of course, know that the only thing that belong on pizza are cheese and pepperoni. And you say, being in the Caribbean as you are, I want ham and pineapple. And we say, absolutely not. My opinion is now fixed. We're not talking about this anymore. I have a viewpoint on that. That is the way I live my life. No ham and no pineapple. So now if you try to convince us that that's actually healthy, it makes no difference because we've already formed our opinion. If we have bought pizza 700 times with pepperoni and cheese, we now have a habit. This is something that is deeply ingrained in us. And somebody comes out with cheese, pepperoni, and anchovies, I won't even touch it. It's now so out of my habit. My habit has fixed what I do. And the one below that is foundational bedrock culture. And we associate that with identity. It's when a person says, I am, and then fill in a blank. It's not I do. So I talk to Italian chefs and I say, okay, can you talk to me without using your hands? And they'll say, hey, I am Italian. There's no way that I can. And the problem is when they say I am this identity, it's now culture. I'm a musician. I'm a Southern California guy. I'm a scholar. I'm a rich person. I'm a poor person. That has now become fixed in their lives as the motivation to behave. So when you say, why in the world do you do that? And you say, because I'm Italian. Yeah, what can I say?
It's who I am.
Right.
That's who I am.
That's who I am, and it becomes the identity.
We have seen not only republicanism develop, but Trumpism, republicanism develop as a culture. And so one of the discussions we have not had effectively in the modern day is what does it mean for a person, whether we're not calling it good or bad. We're simply saying that the Trumpism, republicanism culture now becomes, it's my identity. And I don't make decisions based on conversation, evidence, opinion, viewpoint, even my background. The culture that I had that owns me has now changed the way I understand reality at every level. Right. So once we're there, Mike and I actually know how to address that, but that's part of training and ongoing. That's complicated. Can be done, but that's right. That can be done.
Would you start with finding a common area that both you and the other group might have to gain some kind of a trust first?
That would work. Mostly what we do is have people begin to identify their own journey without judgment.
Oh, okay.
I want people to talk about where they are and how they got there. Right. And if they can begin to do that, Mike and I have a permission sequence where we'll say, can I ask you some more questions about that? Right. And if they say, no, what happened to me in college? Off the record. Okay. All right. That's fine. But once they say, well, sure, I'm open to a conversation. Now we're finding bedrock is shale. There's some openings there. We can start working with that. If I come in gangbusters and say, hey, buddy, I'm going to tell you what you need to know, it's all done, over. And that's the way conversations have been happening in this culture right now.
Yeah.
What the finesse is to be able to say, tell me your story. I'm not going to judge you. I don't have an agenda. But underneath, what I want you to do is discover some things that are going to help your family, your workplace, your neighborhood, the things that matter to you the most. I'm not going to change the worldwide culture in one conversation, but I can help a family survive around the Thanksgiving table if they're willing to say, sure, we'll work with you on that.
Come on over.
That's what we do. That's what we do.
No, it's wonderful, you know. And when I think about, there's a phrase that contempt prior to investigation, and that's kind of what you're talking about with these entrenched ideas. It's like, yes. I'm not willing to even look to investigate something else. And I guess part of what you do is to get people to first look at themselves and maybe see an opening to look at something other than the entrenched belief.
What is really important to understand is this is the human experience. Human beings belong to tribes and to nations and to cultures and to families and to language groups. It's part of our identity as human beings to find our place in that which is connected to us. So I'm not bemoaning that. I'm not saying a person should have no culture. But if you find that the dissolution of family or friendships or business or community is on the basis of cultural forces, and that's distressing, then we can help you begin to understand, have language, and develop some change strategies for that. But when a person says, not interested in talking, this is just a battle and you're the enemy, I can appreciate that. I'm picking up no weapons here. And if you want to be that way, I'm okay. Yep. I don't have to be that way, but if you want to be that way, that's what can I do?
Yeah, it's very frustrating when you encounter that, but I guess that's all you can do is just, okay.
Well, as soon as I say I have an agenda to change you, we're right back to you made me, we're right back there, except I'm on the other side of the equation. So what we try to do is, as much as possible, to suspend the agenda that we have outside of our own lives. My agenda is for my life. And to the degree that I have permission in my family members, my friends, my colleagues, then I can interact. But outside of that, I have to always be gaining permission to have influence.
But from a practical standpoint of living every day in the human experience, so much of what goes on is really about helping people get pretty simple tools to fix and to develop and make those function again, because life has gotten so complex in so many ways they don't know what to do with it.
I love it. Tell me the name of the book again.
Why do people act that way? Mm-hmm. And what can I do about it? It's on Amazon. We have print on demand. We have ebook, and we have audiobook.
Great.
We have a Facebook page. We have a website called Why Do People Act That Way, or just use the initials WDPATW. Our podcast is Gripping Reality. If you can't do anything else, you can send an email to Myke@grippingreality.com. And you can spell Myke either way. Myke with an I or Myke with a Y. Myke@grippingreality.com, and we'll get the email. We share all the emails that come in. You can ask questions. We'll take them up on our podcast. You can say, not on your podcast, just answer this question. We can shoot a response back, but you can find everything that way.
Yeah. And I want to say to the listeners, check out the podcast, because these guys are not only dispensing wonderful insights and tools and wisdom, but they have a good time.
We do.
And we like to see people having a good time.
we do. We kind of figure that people might need to laugh just a little bit right now.
Yeah, just a little.
Just a little, yeah.
Thanks so much for talking to me today. It was a great talk. I feel like I've known you guys a long time, more than just an hour.
Thank you.
Yeah. Keep up the good work.
Thanks, Bob.
Thank you.
Appreciate your having us on.
Yeah.
Very much.
Hey, thanks for listening to The Exploding Human. Much appreciation. TheExplodingHuman.com is my website. And if you would like to go to patreon.com, patreon.com/TheExplodingHuman, and donate to the show, there's some extra content available there. Some interviews with myself, and we're going to be adding new material as the weeks go on. So it will be worth your while if you want to support the show. There'll be some extra things for you there on Patreon. Also, there's a YouTube channel, The Exploding Human with Bob Nickman. Add the with Bob Nickman. You can hear all the interviews there, and also on the Facebook page, The Exploding Human. Thank you so much for listening. Big thanks to Myke and Mike. Love those guys. Would love to have them back. I probably will sometime. Thank you so much. Have a wonderful day.